It starts like static in the background of a familiar song. Just a whisper, a glance, a subtle tone shift that doesn't belong. You notice it. You feel it in your gut before your mind even has time to label it. It's small, a joke at your expense, a smirk that lingers too long, words that taste like sugar but hit like poison. You want to let it slide. Everyone does. You want to believe it doesn't matter. You convince yourself it's not that deep, that maybe you're imagining things. But deep down, a part of you knows this is the beginning of a test, because disrespect never crashes in like a thunderstorm. It sneaks in like a fog, just thick enough to blur the lines of what should and shouldn't be allowed. And so, you say nothing. The room moves on, the conversation resumes, but your silence, though intended to preserve peace, registers as permission. And in that moment, the cost of staying silent becomes far greater than the risk of confrontation. Because disrespect unchallenged is an invitation. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the message being sent to everyone watching, that it's okay, that it's safe to treat you like this. The room learns quickly. And in social dynamics, perception isn't just powerful, it's everything. What people often misunderstand is that respect isn't granted because you're good or kind or talented. It's enforced, not through intimidation or arrogance, but through strategic clarity. When someone crosses you, your reaction frames the boundary. And it's not about exploding or raising your voice, it's about subtraction. Subtracting your warmth, your attention, your energy. Silence, not as surrender, but as recalibration. Because the most unsettling thing in a room is not the person who yells. It's the one who goes quiet without warning. Still, focused, present, but no longer participating. You look them in the eye. You let the air grow thick. You allow the moment to stretch just enough to make them second guess what they just said. Then, with deliberate calm, you break the tension not with retaliation, but with precision. You ask a question. Simple, director, surgical. Did you mean it that way? The words are plain, but the effect is profound. Because now the burden of clarity isn't on you, it's on them. They're forced to explain, to backtrack, to reveal what was once hidden behind casual tone and lazy smirks. They feel the shift, even if they pretend not to. And everyone else feels it too. The game has changed. This isn't about being feared. It's about becoming unreadable, unplayable. When you refuse to react in the expected way, when you don't offer up your insecurities, don't reach for validation, don't even flinch, you create a void. And that void, that unpredictability, is what starts to build your power. Because people can't control what they can't predict. They begin to second-guess themselves, not because you threatened them, but because you didn't. Because you simply stopped showing up the way they expected. You've interrupted the pattern. And in that interruption, you've planted a seed of doubt. But it's not just about that first moment. It's what comes after that counts. Because anyone can stand tall for a day. What really shapes your identity is consistency. If you let them back in easily, if you return to baseline too quickly, if you signal that the door is still cracked, they will try again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not with words, but they'll test the frame. With silence, with side comments, with social exclusions masked as forgetfulness. That's when you double down. That's when you become not colder, but clearer. You begin to reframe the entire relationship. Not through confrontation, but through distance. You speak less. You share less. You withhold what was once freely given, not out of spite, but out of clarity. You are no longer available in the way you were. You don't need to explain this. You just live it. You change the texture of every future interaction, because the ones who matter won't ask what happened. They'll already know, and the ones who don't need an answer. That's the power of reputation. When your presence shifts a room, not through volume, but through standard. When people begin to consider their words before they speak to you. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Real respect. Earned not by kindness alone, but by boundaries held with calm intensity. You don't need to tell them what the new rules are. They feel it, they adjust, they self-correct, because now they understand. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be respected. And this isn't about dominance. It's about clarity. It's about being the person who cannot be easily moved, easily offended, or easily manipulated. You're no longer dancing to their rhythm. You're no longer trying to keep the peace by dissolving yourself. You're not loud, but your silence, it speaks volumes. It shifts the weather in every interaction. And still, there will be those who push harder. The ones who think they're clever, who mistake your calm for passivity. They'll escalate. They'll probe, this time more subtly. A veiled comment here, a backhanded compliment there. They'll try to confuse the frame. And this is where you level up. You don't give them energy. You give them structure. You become surgical with your words, deliberate with your interactions. When they make a public move, you give a public pause, not a reaction. A pause. You let the moment breathe until it becomes uncomfortable. You might turn to the room, shift your attention, answer someone else's question instead. You might deliver a single calculated line that reframes the entire exchange. No emotion, no apology, just a reminder. Your energy is no longer on tap. They're not just being ignored. They're being excluded, surgically, politely, completely, and that's what they'll feel most. Not insulted. Irrelevant. The warmth that once made them feel powerful in your presence is gone. And that absence, it haunts. People start taking notes, consciously or not. They begin to notice how others treat you, how you hold your space, how you respond not with defense, but with distance. They realize that being close to you means walking carefully, not because you're fragile, but because you are precise, because your standards aren't situational, they're embedded. That's when your presence becomes a filter. It starts selecting who gets to remain in your world. This is where true respect lives. In the silent agreements formed not through words, but through action. The agreement that your space is sacred, that your energy is valuable, that your boundaries are non-negotiable. And anyone who fails to grasp that, even once, finds themselves quietly phased out. No announcement, no conflict, just a slow, intentional fading. Because by the time they realize what they've lost, you've already recalibrated your world without them in it. You're not playing to win arguments. You're not playing to be right. You're not even playing for attention. You're playing for control of yourself, your energy, your presence. And in that control, you create gravity. People orbit around those who know who they are, who don't bend for approval, who don't need the room to like them in order to command it. You no longer flinch at disrespect. You register it, you note it, and then you decide not how to react, but whether the person still deserves access, whether this moment is a misunderstanding or a pattern, whether it's worth a correction or a quiet departure. Because the most powerful people don't correct every offense. They reserve their energy for what shapes perception, not for what scratches ego. And when the world starts seeing you this way, as someone who moves with intent, who speaks with precision, who doesn't entertain anything beneath their standard, your name shifts. It becomes a warning, a compliment, a reference point. They say, be careful around them. They don't play like that. Not with fear, but with respect. Because you've made it clear, to be close to you is to be careful with you. And then something interesting starts to happen. The very same people who once tested you now tiptoe. Their jokes lose their edge. Their comments grow safer. Their tone shifts just slightly when addressing you, like their minds are running faster than their mouths, editing in real time. And it's not because you raised your voice. It's because you didn't. You showed them what silence backed by standards feels like. You've become the person who isn't predictable, who doesn't need to retaliate to win, who doesn't need to respond at all to make an impact. And that quiet power, it rewrites the way they approach you, the way they include you, the way they speak your name when you're not in the room. But not everyone adapts. Some people will keep pressing, not because they're brave, but because they're desperate. Desperate to provoke, to pull you out of alignment, to drag you down to a level where they feel stronger, louder, more relevant. These people aren't trying to connect, they're trying to control. They throw out barbs like bait, waiting to see if you'll bite. They want chaos. They want a crack in your composure. Because if they can shake you, they can say, "See? They're not so composed after all." That's their currency. Your reaction is their prize. And so, you give them none. Instead, you turn their tactics into spotlights. You don't argue, you observe. You don't confront, you question, publicly if needed, but always calmly, always precisely. The power here isn't in making them look bad. It's in letting them do it to themselves. A simple, pointed question. Do you think that's appropriate? Or would you say that if someone else were here? And suddenly, their bravado turns into explanation. Their confidence dissolves into defensiveness. You're not attacking, you're revealing. And the room watches it happen. Silently, closely. They register the imbalance. They feel the shift. Now you've done something far more powerful than win an argument. You've shifted the frame permanently. That person, the one who thought they had power, just lost it, on their own terms, by their own hand, with your steady silence guiding the way. That's the art. That's where control lives. Not in shouting down the offender, but in allowing them to collapse under the weight of their own behavior when the spotlight is too sharp and the crowd too silent, and you, unbothered, unmoved, walk away without needing a final word. Because the room speaks for you now. Your reputation speaks for you. You've established the one truth they can't forget. You are not to be trifled with, not because you're cruel, because you're clear. And clarity in a world addicted to confusion is magnetic. People begin to crave your presence, not because it's always warm, but because it's always exact. They know where they stand with you. They know what you tolerate. They know how quickly you'll exit if those standards are crossed. And now you've become something even more rare. You've become self-contained. Your validation isn't up for grabs. Your time isn't distributed without thought. Your energy isn't spent just to smooth over someone else's ego. That makes you different. That makes you dangerous. Not in a way that threatens safety, but in a way that redefines dynamics. People feel the gravity of who you are without you having to announce it. And when you speak, they lean in, not because your voice is loud, but because your silence made your words scarce. And scarcity drives value. This is when respect turns into reputation. When your presence begins doing the work before you say a word, people introduce you differently. They approach you with more intention. They refer others to you with a certain reverence. They don't play around. That one's sharp. You'll want to bring your A game. And it's not because you demanded it. It's because you embodied it. You didn't argue for your worth. You enforced it through behavior, through precision, through presence. But there's a deeper layer, one that separates those who gain respect from those who keep it. Because being respected in a moment is easy. Being respected over time, that takes discipline, especially when old patterns try to pull you back. When someone cracks a joke and everyone laughs but you. When someone tries to minimize you, not with words, but with absence. Exclusion from a conversation, a decision, a circle. Those are the moments where your frame is truly tested. And here's the rule. You don't chase. Not for laughter. Not for inclusion. Not for clarity. If they wanted you present, you would have been. And this is where your power doubles. Because now your absence has become louder than your presence. People start to notice when you're not around. They feel the lack. They ask questions, not because you made a scene, but because the scene feels emptier without you. That's the effect of high-value presence. It leaves a shadow, an echo, an imprint. And for those who once disrespected you, that absence hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Because now, not only are you unavailable, you're unforgettable. There will come a time when one of those people tries to return, maybe with a smile, maybe with nostalgia, maybe pretending nothing ever happened. And here's your move. You let them speak. You let them reach. But you don't reach back. You don't reignite what you've already extinguished. You don't return to what you've outgrown. And you don't punish them either. You do something far more powerful. You treat them like someone who no longer holds weight. You remain polite, civil, distant. No grudge, no bitterness, just a quiet reminder. I moved on, and you didn't come with me. This is the apex of your posture, when even mercy feels like consequence. When your forgiveness doesn't feel like welcome, it feels like release. You've freed yourself from needing their understanding, their validation, their apology, and they can feel it. They can sense that whatever space they once occupied in your world has closed behind them. Quietly, permanently, without ceremony or announcement. This is the architecture of power. It's not built on how loud you get, but how well you hold your silence. It's crafted in how rarely you speak and how precisely you move. And those who tried to test you, who once mistook your calm for weakness, now become part of the story others tell, to explain why you are the way you are, why you don't laugh at every joke, why you don't entertain everyone, why you don't stay where you're not valued. Because the lessons that forged your posture weren't gentle, and your silence is just the residue of all the noise you chose not to respond to.